Welcome back to the Empowered Aging Podcast. Today, we have a wonderful speaker joining us today who's full of knowledge about voice, swallowing, and the airway. And that's Siobhan Groves. She's a speech language pathologist. She has a big following. She tries to work a lot with people with Parkinson, so that's why I wanted her to join us today. I met her through Hamel Kerr Foundation. She has come to speak with us there. So I wanted to bring her on and share her knowledge with all of you. And she's going to discuss some of the aging process changes, the normal changes, aging process, and how Parkinson's is also affected with the voice. So I'll let her take over.
Hi. Um, as Michelle said, I'm Siobhan Groves. I am a speech language pathologist, and I own Apiary Voice and Communication, which is based in Greensboro, North Carolina. I see people in their homes and I see people via video. And I have been working with people with Parkinson's for my entire career as a speech pathologist. A little more background. I started in the world of theater and musical theater, and that's where I fell in love with voice production and singing and speech and things like that. And then when I wanted to make that into a grown-up career, I went back to school for speech pathology at Emerson College in Boston, got my MS, interned at some wonderful places associated with Mass General and Boston University Children's Hospital, and then moved down to North Carolina to start my career. So I've been certified in LSVT since 2017. And to mix it up, last year I got certified in Speak Out as well. We'll talk about both of those programs for Parkinson's voice later. And yeah, I'm really keen to work with this community because the outcomes from therapy are really well documented and very positive and really well researched. It's the kind of thing where if a person is able and capable to put in the work and the time, they can really make some improvements.
Just like with movement, same with voice.
Mm-hmm.
Practice, you have to practice. Keep it up.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how voice works, just to begin with. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to start with just talking about breathing because your air is the power to your voice. It's like the gas in a car. If there's no gas in the car ain't going to go. If there is no air behind your voice, you ain't going to have one. So it's pretty much as simple as that. And, when you breathe in, the function of breathing is controlled by your diaphragm, which is a muscle line in the underside of your lungs. It contracts down to get that air into your lungs, and then it relaxes up using the muscles of your rib cage and your abdomen to help support the air as it leaves your body. That's mostly involuntary, right? It happens while we're sleeping, so we're not choosing whether or not to breathe, but how we breathe and where we focus the work is something we can control. So, for example, I'm often telling people, nothing up here helps you breathe. You don't have to go in order to take a breath in. So, at any rate, once you get that breath in and out, then you're ready to speak. As you're breathing, your vocal cords are open. As you speak, your vocal cords are closed. And once your vocal cords are closed, air moves up through the vocal cords, causing them to vibrate in a smooth wave-like fashion. And that's what generates sound. The sound is then filtered through the bones and tissues of our head and neck. And that is what makes our voices unique, depending on the bulk of the vocal cords or the stretch length. That'll affect pitch, tone. But yeah, it's a pretty straightforward process. Take the air in, let the air out through the vocal cords, let it resonate in the structures up here, and you've got your voice. So that's normal voice production. Now I'm going to have Michelle bring up an image of some vocal cords, so we can look at normal during speech, and then aging. Okay.
All right. Can you see that?
I can, yes.
Okay.
All right. So The first image with the labels attached to it, where everything looks open like a V. This is what your vocal folds look like when you're breathing. They're open down to your airway, and quiet breathing or louder breathing like that, nice open vocal cords. When you speak, they come together flat. They need to come together flat in order to make sound, and in order to vibrate properly. But as we age, we lose muscle mass. We lose muscle mass in all parts of our body, and our vocal cords have a muscle body underneath them, just like any other part of the body. So as we start to lose muscle mass there, we start to experience something called bowing, which you can see in the far image. Bowing is a curvature of the vocal cords. And what it means is that when they go to close, in order for you to make sound, they don't meet efficiently. When they don't meet efficiently, one of two things is going to happen. Either the voice is going to get weaker and quieter and maybe more raspy, more dysphonic, or you're going to be using a lot more effort to close your vocal cords. Your body's going to be working a lot harder. And so that work leads to fatigue, and that can often then contribute to further hoarseness.
Now, Siobhan, this is normal aging process.
Normal aging process. That's right. So this is
this happens to everybody.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Everybody. Yes. Every single person. If you listen to any public figure who happens to have been recorded throughout their lifetime, you not only will you hear just a difference in the way that they speak, but you will hear a difference in voice quality. Men's voices generally get a little higher and lighter. Women's voices generally get a little bit lower and a little bit rougher in pitch.
I heard on a clip yesterday of some congressional hearings of someone speaking, and I know his voice was very, I don't even know how to describe it. It was almost kind of trembly and scratchy. Is that part of this?
No. No. That's a separate neurological condition called spasmodic dysphonia.
Okay.
And if that public figure continues to be in our lives, we're going to hear a lot more of it.
Okay.
That's a condition that can be treated in other ways, but not generally with therapy alone.
Okay. And this normal aging process here, is that something that you can prevent altogether? Can you make it not happen if you do the right things, or?
Well, let me turn it back on you. Can you continue to maintain the same amount of muscle mass you have always had through the duration of your life?
Not fully.
Okay. So
but I can prevent some decline.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's really what we can do too. So, the way I describe it is people are conditioned to use their voice in certain ways across their lifespan, right? Depending on what they do personally or professionally. So, for instance, a teacher who's speaking all day, let's say they work, into their 60s, 70s, they're retiring late. But every single day they've been teaching, they haven't had any other major health problems, and their body's conditioned to that level of performance. And then they retire. And they've experienced that loss of muscle mass, but they no longer have the conditioning to meet it. And so that's when changes start to happen. That's usually quite gradual. People will say, oh, I retired 2 years ago and I used to talk all day long, and now all of a sudden I can't hold a 30-minute conversation. Well, the demand has lowered such that the 30-minute conversation becomes much more challenging for those muscles.
So that is, yeah, very much like any other physical activity. If we stop doing it, or at least lessen the intensity or frequency, whatever, it's going to become more difficult.
Absolutely. And in the aging population, opportunities for conversation reduce over time, unless you're very, very intentional, or in a situation where you can use your voice all the time. More than likely, those opportunities are going to lessen. I've had plenty of patients where a spouse passed away, and nothing else necessarily happened to the patient, but they just didn't have that daily conversation opportunity anymore. So creating those opportunities, finding ways to use your voice, and not only for the health of your voice, but for your social health as well, really makes a big difference in maintaining the quality of your voice.
Yes.
Yeah, so all of that will happen. Regardless of what you do, time moves on, and we lose mass. And so you can do things. There are strengthening exercises, things that are comparable to what we might do in a Parkinson's with a Parkinson's patient too. But for the normal aging voice, it doesn't require quite as much intensity, and it's something that is a little bit simpler to maintain, we'll say. Now, the difference between normal aging voice and the Parkinson's voice is the fundamental feature of Parkinson's, which is the loss of dopamine, which, as we know, essentially is the air is the fuel to our voice. Dopamine is the fuel to our motivation, our muscles, our mind. It gives us the energy for our output, right? And so everything I just talked about, the reduction in muscle mass, sometimes there's a reduction in respiratory strength as well, just reduction in strength all over, compounded with this reduction in the energy of the output, which means that the way the person speaks will feel normal to them. The amount of energy that they feel they're putting into their voice feels like the same amount that they always have. But because that dopamine meter is turned down, that normal comes across a little bit more like this, with very little sound and very little effort, at least as far as the listener is aware. And that's the broad what happens. Loss of dopamine, loss of awareness of intentional effort, weak voice. Yeah, that's kind of what it breaks down to. Now, this comes out in other ways. There's the loudness of the voice. There's also articulation. How clear is the speech? When the speech starts to get, I call it kind of slushy, that's known as dysarthria, where the articulation becomes very imprecise. It's the same thing. The energy that's getting put into the muscles moving there is less than it was before. Another thing you'll notice in some members of the population is facial masking. They're not giving you a lot of expression when you're talking about things. Again, same thing. That energy just isn't going there.
Does that affect speech as well, just because the muscles aren't really moving, or is it just
the facial muscles specifically?
Yes.
Well, so I mean, down here certainly, with the movement of your articulators, that has to be more crisp and specific. The way, honestly, what I see more of is just the listener not understanding the message, or the intention, or a person's relative desire to be engaged. This sort of, so it becomes an issue. It does become an issue for communication from an articulation perspective, but then it also becomes an issue for communication from an intention and engagement perspective too.
Right. It looks like they don't care, and that does factor in a lot, even though I know that is an issue. Sometimes it can be a little challenging in some of my classes when I have Parkinson's and they're just kind of staring at me blankly. And I only know that they actually do enjoy it because they tell me afterward, But during the class itself, it's like, oh my gosh, am I boring them, or like, are they just having no fun?
Is this more torture? Yes.
Must be okay.
I know. And I think so for people like us who engage professionally with this community and are knowledgeable about those things, we can have that conversation with ourselves of like, okay, John isn't really like bored. He doesn't hate me. He's just you know,
But
this is the way John presents.
I
Exactly.
hear from some of my clients that um, family members just don't think that they're engaged, or they think they're
They don't.
not, yeah, they don't care. They're just, and I feel like surely they know that this is a symptom of Parkinson's, but maybe they don't truly
I
internalize
know it, and that you know, I guess that may be it. This is a person that you've, you know, presumably been with for a very long time,
it. Yes.
and you're used to them behaving in a certain way, and then that sort of just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It is, I have experienced the same thing. It is extremely difficult for family members not to take it personally.
Hmm.
Um, you know, especially when it comes to home practice, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Um, but um, but yeah, the desire is there.
Yeah.
Desire is there. Well, the desire is there, and it's not. It's the dopamine
Yeah.
factor.
Yeah. Unless they have
There is,
apathy, that's a
there
whole nother
is,
story.
yes,
Yeah.
the apathy, um, and Parkinson's patients also sort of broadly have poor awareness of their deficits.
Yeah.
So it's the, you know, the lack of motivation that's going to come from the lack of dopamine, and then it's just like literally being aware that it's going on and that there's an issue,
Hmm.
which is really what happens with most of many of my patients. They come
Yeah.
in and they say, so and so says they can't hear me. My wife won't stop asking me to repeat myself.
Yeah.
You know, the guys at the golf game aren't, I'm not able to get in on the conversation, and I don't know what's wrong with them, but I guess I'm here. And
Yeah.
so,
They're doing it for someone else.
yes. And then, yeah, and
Yeah.
then we kind of work through that. But it's but that's a big challenge too, is just
Yeah,
straight
it is.
knowing. Yeah.
Now, you had mentioned, and this might come up more later,
Yeah.
so feel free to defer if necessary, but you talked about the speech getting low, or kind of, I forget the term you use, but that kind of slurry speech.
Dysarthria.
Dysarthria, yeah.
Mm.
So I also, there's that spectrum. I have a few people who, when they take their medication, they especially have this issue of talking really fast and and we can't understand them because they're talking so fast.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're aware of it, and they try, at least
Mhm.
the ones I know of, but
Mhm.
it's because of that medication, that dopamine,
Mhm.
I guess, is that what's happening? It's
Give
like
them,
this jolt kind of.
it depends. Well, so, you know, to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure about that with regards to the speed, although it does make sense. It does make sense to me in a way. Um, uh, when I was in school, we were kind of broadly taught that Parkinson's can either happen bottom up or top down.
Oh.
So it'll either manifest in like the motor movements, the gross and fine motor movements first, or it'll manifest in speech and cognition and things like that first, and then work its way down.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
Um, so just so because you probably see more motor patients
yeah.
than I have a feeling you have experienced that more than I have.
Okay.
Because what I experience with medications is is that if they're not on something that is extended release, um, the ebb and flow of how that is feeding them really does change.
Hmm.
I'll schedule appointments with people around their medication times, the times they take their medication, in part so that they're at full strength for
Hmm.
sessions. And then on the opposite end, we try and do a few when they're not at full strength.
Yes.
We can deal with
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is, I think probably for a motor patient
Mm,
who doesn't have as much difficulty with their speech, yeah, that's going to turn things way up in that
uh-huh.
department.
Mm, okay.
Whereas for my speech patients, it's kind of going in the opposite direction. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Now that I've taken you completely off track of your.
No, because of course I thought of something else.
Yeah.
What you're talking about too, some patients will describe like a stutter, you know, or
Yeah.
like just trying to get too many words out at one time. And
Hmm.
long story short, it's the speed of their brain is not matching with the speed of their
Yeah.
mouth.
Right.
And for some people, that comes out as talking really rapid fire. For others, it comes out more as like a stop, or like repeating a certain word in order to get onto the next one, or hitting certain sounds if they're having difficulty forming them, but more of like a classic stutter, in that way too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot going on there.
A lot going on there. Yeah. Um, yeah. Now, there are a couple of other things. We're sort of getting into, what do I treat? What do I
Yes.
do? Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
What do you do?
What do I do?
How can you help?
So there are a number of areas of specialty for speech pathologists. I will say one that's really big, but that I don't necessarily do as much of, is cognition. And this is outside of Parkinson's as well too. This is, I post-stroke, or we're dealing with, a person has this onset of dementia, things like that. But we do cognitive tasks and try and integrate those cognitive tasks into the other types of things that we do. So broadly, cognition. Now, me as a specialist, as Michelle said, I specialize in voice, swallowing, and airway. So I kind of describe myself as a physical therapist for this part of your body. Michelle can do everything else. I can do that, but only on the inside. So anyway, there are therapy programs for voice and speech, which I'll talk a little bit more in depth in after we review this. They will have an impact on both the loudness of a person's voice and the clarity of their speech. The other piece that is always worth considering is swallowing, the health of the swallow. A lot of my Parkinson's patients will either have difficulty with managing their secretions, or they may have some difficulty with their swallow. Things might go down more slowly. They might find themselves, quote unquote, choking more often, or things going down the wrong way. Just like everything else, it's a function of the dopamine and the effort that it's taking, that is going into the swallow. And so that's another thing that can be treated with therapy, very much like voice and speech too. Yeah. The other piece, which I already mentioned a little bit, as SLPs, we don't really do this, but I always like to screen for it. Hearing.
Yes.
Now, this is going to decline with age too, right? Always. Just like your voice changes, your hearing is probably going to change. And our patients feel a lot of different ways about whether or not they want to engage with getting hearing aids or having that tested, depending on how it makes them feel. But if your partner or your loved one, or your friend even, is putting in the effort to go to therapy and work on their voice and work on their communication, they can put in the effort to go to the audiologist and put in their hearing aids. There are also just some common sense things that everyone can do, including not starting conversations when you're in different rooms, or turning off the TV when you're talking to each other, or making sure that you're facing each other if you are in the same room. Those simple adaptations are things that both patients and partners can be doing all the time to communicate more effectively.
Now, I just had the thought that when someone can't hear well, I find it just occurred to me that the person who can't hear well, I can't say I've ever experienced them speaking louder because they can't hear themselves. So why don't they speak louder?
Sometimes they do. So
Okay.
it does happen that some people will speak louder as they start to lose their hearing. I don't think honestly, I think it has something to do with the way we communicate now, that it's not as big of an issue as it might have been,
Mm,
well, a long time
way
ago,
back when.
because that's a trope that we're taught too, is like, if someone is having trouble with their voice or their speech, or they're having trouble like being understood, rule out hearing problems first.
Hmm.
And that's still sound advice.
Yeah.
um but I can see where it might not be as big of a deal as it once was, or something that's
Yeah.
impacting people as much. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So if someone comes to you
Mhm.
with, let's say, a general speech that we'll start with the regular Parkinson's. I think the normal thing is that soft and low
Mhm.
voice that they can't be
Yeah.
heard. What are
Yeah.
your strategies? What kinds of things do you do? How do you help?
Yeah, so when we evaluate you, we get some baseline information. Any evaluation or initiation of therapy should begin with at least some kind of acoustic measurement and recording of the speech. Doesn't have to be fancy, um, but just so that you have that data as something to compare it to.
When you
Uh,
say acoustic, you don't mean how they're hearing. You're
No,
saying
I mean,
recording their
no, I
voice.
mean a measurement of their loudness.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. So for instance, like I have a specially calibrated mic and program, so that when I'm with a patient, I'm recording them and I know that I'm getting accurate sound data. And then, but you know, there are ways to do without a specialized program, with simple apps and things like that. Where you can get enough information to properly evaluate someone. The other thing is that it's not totally necessary in the Parkinson's population, but it is the gold standard to see an ENT, and have an endoscopic exam done. Just basically have someone take a look at your vocal cords.
Mhm.
Um, just to rule out that there's not any other pathology, to make sure that there's not, something that would impede any progress in therapy. One step further than that is an exam that's called a video stroboscopy. It's the same idea. They're going to use a camera that goes down your nose, but the light of the camera picks up the movement of the vocal cords. In the Parkinson's population, that would show us um, whether or not they are capable of meeting all the way together without that gap in the middle. That gives us just a little bit more insurance of how well a person's going to do in therapy.
Mhm.
So once you're evaluated, next thing we do is we test for stimulability, which means I have you try some things with your voice. I give you some cues to do things a little bit differently, and we see how things change with just that little bit of guidance, assuming that the person is stimulable for therapy. Um, Voice therapy, by nature for Parkinson's, begins with an intensive boot camp style of treatment. Um, the way that the two main programs work, LSVT Loud and Speak Out, is that sessions are either 3 or 4 times a week for 4 to 5 weeks, so that you're doing a total of 15 to 16 sessions in
Mhm.
that amount of time. That's a lot.
A lot.
It's a lot, and it's very, very intensive. It's a big commitment. Um,
Mhm.
to kind of talk through what we do before we talk about why making that commitment is important. The way sessions work with either type of therapy is you spend the first half on your exercise. So, this is where you're doing endurance tasks to strengthen the voice, holding out those long, loud ah sounds, doing glides to stretch the vocal cords and exercise your range. Ah. Oh, that was my first one today. um, and repeating those, and trying to hit longer, higher, lower goals. That portion always stays the same. The second half is the speaking tasks. The speaking tasks actually using your voice the way you normally would. And this works in a hierarchy. So for every person, no matter the program, I have them come up with a list of 10 functional phrases. A functional phrase is something that you would realistically say on a regular basis. So that could be things like demographic information, your name, your address, date of birth, the stuff you have to tell the doctor. It should also include social things, hi, honey, how are you? Good morning. What do you want for breakfast? How was your day? It can include things for work. Is so-and-so here yet? Have I gotten any calls? Things that are going to come out of your mouth on a regular basis that you are going to practice intensively and daily, so that saying them at the desired volume and with the right articulation just comes out automatically. So automatically and from the beginning, we're making it functional for the person. The way the other speaking tasks work is that they work in a hierarchy. We start small. We start with single words, simple responses. Yes, no, thank you, help, you're welcome. And we gradually make them longer common phrases, longer sentences. I am often having patients read aloud because when you have what you need to say in front of you, are putting far less mental effort into doing it the right way. So there's a lot of reading aloud to begin with as we're working through that hierarchy. And then finally, conversation, actually talking to each other. That's a part of therapy too. And so that we try and do in a hierarchy as well. I reserve the last 5 or 10 minutes of each session. And in the beginning, I'm asking the patient questions, simple questions, like we start with any hierarchy. How do you spell your name? What is your phone number? Things like that. And gradually we move into, more detailed biographical information. And usually by the end of the 4 weeks, we've incorporated something that is a special interest of the patients, and I have learned a lot about it. Because eventually I have them teach me something. So I know about hanging wallpaper. I know about Dungeons and Dragons. I know a lot about golf and college basketball.
Yeah. So your program really is, well, it's LSVT. So the big version is obviously very similar. We have those things. They give us goals. We break down those goals into steps. We have a certain exercise regimen that we go through. So yeah, very much the same. So speech, vocal, same as movement, big movement.
And
must practice it and work on it. And I think that intensity that you were talking about really goes back to, a lot of studies that have been done, that if you need to do something for, what do they say, 21, 28 days, something like, to really become a habit. Well, I think it's kind of along those lines, right? Of making it become part of your life. Because wouldn't you say they have to continue this like forever? To some extent.
I don't just say it. All the research says it. All the research says it. And also I do say it when I see a patient, a couple of years after our initial course of therapy, and nothing else has changed, but they haven't been doing their home practice.
They'll ask me, how long do I have to do this? Forever.
Forever.
It doesn't mean we can't modify things.
No. And that's why I got certified in 2 modalities, because as effective as LSVT is, and I'll never say it's not, as effective as it is hard for people. The initial commitment is its own thing, and Speak Out has the same or similar initial commitment. So it's not like that's changing, but the repetitive nature of it is challenging for people. The ability to maintain that motivation over time, so challenging. You might want to do it on Tuesday, but Thursday might not feel the same way. Um, but the thing is, the reason why for us, for speech pathologists, and maybe you think about it the same way in PT too. We think about it in terms of recalibration. Do you guys use that?
Yeah. Yes, we use that term.
Yeah. So essentially, recalibration is the idea that because the output of the dopamine has been turned down, 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 we need to recalibrate the person's output so that they recognize up, 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 up as normal,
Yes.
as normal output, and that they are conditioned to meet that output, right? So I came up with a very silly metaphor that you can definitely cut out if it doesn't work. Okay. All right. But because I was thinking about this yesterday, how I would convince someone, why this is necessary when they haven't engaged in it before. And then I thought, well, what if I wanted to run a marathon? And the thing is that I'm not a runner. I don't run. But I really want to run a marathon, right? And so how am I going to do that? I want to run this marathon. It's important to me. And so one thing I could do is go outside and run the marathon. And if I did that, assuming I was alive at the end, I would be hurt. It would feel, I would fail. I definitely wouldn't get to the end. I would be very discouraged. I would almost certainly never do it again.
Yeah.
So the assuming I can go out and do it theory, not going to work. The next way that I could do, and I'm not going to argue that this is not the most ideal way to do it, but the next thing I could do is I could start walking a few times a week. I could gradually build that strength and endurance. It would take years for me to get to that goal, but I could do it independently if that's the way that I decided I wanted or needed to. Now, there are a few things that make that ideal, but need to be assumed. First assumption is that there is no urgent need for me to run a marathon. I don't have to do it in 6 months. There is no urgent need for me to run a marathon. I could take years. Second is that I can maintain my personal discipline and my desire to slowly make progress over that time in ways that I will probably not necessarily be able to see and appreciate in the near term. And then finally, it's also assuming that I can effectively recover from like an injury, or if I get hurt, or if I'm overly tired, or just something physical becomes a barrier, that I can recover from that independently, and that I'm not worried that it's going to happen again. All of those are really big assumptions, and require a lot. So the third is that I could work with a trainer. The trainer guides my form. The trainer keeps me safe from injury. The trainer sets the schedule for practice, so I'm not responsible for saying what I'm going to do and when I'm going to do it. The trainer advises on other exercises that help support my progress towards my one singular goal. They help me gain the skill faster and more safely. They help me set realistic expectations and support the long-term goals. They keep it efficient with accountability. And you build the skills to maintain the progress and also respond to challenges more efficiently. Yep. So as messy as this metaphor may have been, if running a marathon is communicating effectively with my loved ones, first of all, we don't have years to do that.
Yeah.
Period. Second of all, if you've got Parkinson's, all those other assumptions go straight out the window. There is not a way to hack that kind of slow maintenance and progress. It's not something that your body does anymore.
Yeah.
So
we're the trainers.
By starting with a trainer. Yes, by starting with a trainer, by starting with a boot camp, by recalibrating with that intensity, you are putting in an early investment so that you can then be independent and functional for much more time to come. It's a lot at the beginning.
Yeah. And there's another term, and it slips my mind right now, that we use in LSVT that pertains to doing things that mean something to them. Like your phrases that they choose. We choose
Okay.
activities that they want to be able to do.
Yeah.
It's not like
Yes.
we're making this stuff up. You
No.
need to be able to pick up a 10-pound weight and carry it across the room. That
Yeah.
may not be appropriate for one person, but it is for another. So
And
saliency, that's what it is.
very, yes.
Where
Yeah.
we make it
Mm-hmm.
we personalize our treatments, right? You do for
Yes.
speech, PT
Yes.
does for us, that we do things to meet their needs. Not every treatment's the same. So I like people to
Exactly.
understand that, because we're not just going to sit and lift weights and do something that's
Yeah.
not, it's all functional.
Yes.
And
If I do, when I do speak to people who have been through the program before with someone else or with a I don't know, with someone else, they'll usually say, all we did was go, ah, and he just made me yell. That's usually, they just made me yell,
Mhm.
is often what I'm told. And uh, sure, yeah, we do
Yeah.
have to do some long, loud ahs and stuff, um, but yeah, but making it functional. I was talking about reading earlier,
Mhm.
and LSVT, the way LSVT specifically is structured is there's a lot of reading. It's actually kind of literacy dependent, in a way. Yeah.
Mhm.
This is the first time I'm realizing that.
Yeah.
But at any rate, yeah, you're reading aloud, and as I said before, it's because you have the thing in front of you, and therefore you're not having to put in as much cognitive effort to
Sure.
say the thing. But it, it that doesn't feel functional for people. It builds endurance. That's the reason why I have people continue to do it, is
Mhm.
that it's much harder for them to sit there and monologue for 3 minutes about their life than it is for them to sit and read a paragraph.
Yeah.
But sitting and reading and maintaining your loud voice while reading a paragraph is a totally different task
Yeah.
than having a conversation. So all that is to say is that Speak Out engages a lot more in conversational tasks in the hierarchy too. So it's
Mhm.
not just I'm reading this phrase, I'm reading this sentence, I'm reading this quote, I'm reading this paragraph. It's and I'm responding to short form questions. I am
Mhm.
listing categories of items. I'm giving you the plot to well-known films,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So yes, we try and engage that too, just so it's not as much of a slog.
Yeah. But, with that being said, there are times when, we do need to have them do something that may seem not functional,
Yeah.
but at the same time, at least myself, and suspect you do as well, is explain why we're doing this in order to achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
When we break down those tasks, right, which may
Yeah.
not seem like a functional thing, but it's part of a functional thing.
Yes, it's part of a
And
function.
and yeah, I think people appreciate knowing why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then when you
Yes.
explain it, it's like, oh, okay, I
Yeah.
can go along with that.
Yeah.
As opposed to I'm putting a peg from one thing to another thing. Why am I doing that?
Why am I stacking these Cheerios?
They
Yes.
just need to know why. I
Mhm.
mean, I know, I want to know why.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
keeping that, yeah, and being able to keep that consistent too. So one
Yeah.
thing, one thing I've noticed doing in sessions lately, the first move for both LSVT and for Speak Out is this ah sound, and you really have to emphasize with the patient that they make it an ah sound, because when you make the ah, it closes your palate. And one thing that happens with patients who have Parkinson's is that the palate gets weak and they start to sound hyponasal, which is like you've got a cold because the
Uh-huh.
palate is just not really like closing efficiently. So when you go, palate's still open. When you go, palate is closed. And
Uh,
all of my patients complain about sounding like they have a cold, but none of them want to do to begin with. And I have to continually coach that and remind, like, hey, this is, I know this is your least favorite task. We're getting it done first. You've got to make it an in order for it to be effective.
I
Um,
never thought about it. Yeah, you
yeah,
always do not o, or
that's why.
e, or
Mm-hmm.
other ah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are other reasons to use other sounds that I could get all nerdy about,
Sure, yeah, but
yes,
have their
that's the one.
specific purpose
Mhm.
because you're
It
facilitating
has
different
a
things.
it has a purpose, and it's the same thing like with the glides. People will say, "I'm not a singer," and I'll say,
Mm,
"Okay, great, you don't have to be, but you might want someone to know if you're happy or mad, or that something's important to you, and in order to do that, you're going to need to be able to change your the pitch and tone of your voice."
mhm,
Parkinson's voice tends to land in sort of a monotone, regardless of level of engagement, sincerity, desire, uh,
mhm,
and things like ah,
mhm. Yeah,
start to move that around. Yeah,
so
yeah,
much involved in this whole
it is, and
whole
it's
thing.
hard. Not hard. It's probably impossible to know everything.
Yeah.
Right? It's impossible. And yeah, so it's those little bits that we do have as specialists
Mhm,
really, I think, bring a lot to the patient experience and their understanding of what's happening in their body, and how they can manage it and still
mhm.
live their best life. Yeah.
I feel like we have so much more to talk about.
Yes.
So, we will have to have a part two to this discussion
Yes,
because
I would love that.
there was just so much. Um,
It's a
but
lot.
yeah, so, but we try not to
You don't want to overwhelm.
think too much, yeah, give them in
Yeah.
little chunks. So
Yeah.
let's see. Is there something we can give to our viewers right now
Mhm.
that they can take away from this and maybe, I don't know, something they can do or look up or something they can walk away with
Absolutely.
until the next episode?
Absolutely. So, um, if a person has already done a program like LSVT or Speak Out, but they've kind of fallen off the wagon, um, if they're a person who's maybe having some difficulty, starting to have some difficulty with their voice, not sure they want to go all the way the therapy direction yet, but they still want to exercise, want to work. Reading aloud. I know I just said that LSVT was literacy contingent, but we'll start with this reading aloud, because when you're reading aloud, again, you have it in front of you. You're not having to cognitively process, but you have to read aloud a special way. You have to read aloud with exaggerated enthusiasm, like you're reading to a child, or you just got news that you won $1 million. By doing this, you're engaging your respiration because you're taking in bigger, more intentional breaths. You're speaking louder because you're more excited. Your articulation gets more specific. $1 million. And your expression starts to go up too. My eyebrows are going up. I'm getting tense. All of that to get engaged while
I
reading
see
aloud.
the theater in you right now, Sean.
Yes. Well, yeah, my musical theater background
Yes.
really feeds well into keeping people engaged here. But that really is the thing, and that's when someone has gone through the program, there are daily exercises that are prescribed to do. um, but if they're not going to do anything else, I say read aloud. Now, to get off of reading, um, the other thing that I recommend people do, it's an easy way to practice, is if they're in the car by themselves, generally, say what they see out the window. There's a stoplight. That guy's turning left. Walgreens is up ahead. Same thing. And, with that same level of engagement, maybe instead of $1 million, you're a riverboat guide or something. Anyway,
Yeah,
but that idea, you are
great idea.
finding time to intentionally use your voice with enthusiasm. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Be a guide. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that's a
Exactly.
great idea. I love that one. I hadn't heard that one before, but
And for some people, it's simple. So finding something that they're already doing.
yeah.
If I have a patient who reads a daily devotional, we read the first part of that out loud. Um,
Hmm.
or reading your book is part of your daily routine. You read the first paragraph aloud, and then it becomes a relaxation task, not a therapy task.
Hmm. Yeah.
But finding ways to fold it into your life so that it becomes more of a habit, and um, it's more accessible for you
Hmm.
is very important too. Yeah.
Excellent. I think that is something everybody can do. You know what? Even if you don't have Parkinson's, right? Because
Oh,
as
yes.
we age, it's like we talked about in the beginning of how that natural
Mhm.
aging process. So read
Mhm.
out loud, talk to yourself in the car while you're
Pets
doing,
are a big one. Yeah.
daily activities, talk to
Mhm.
yourself. I talk to my cats. They
Yes,
don't answer,
exactly.
so no worries. I'm not crazy, but I talk to them.
Yeah. Read the
So,
mail aloud, respond to the TV. They're not things that we would typically think of as, socially normal or what have you. But, if you don't have opportunities to use your voice, but you really want to talk to your friends on Sunday, you need to be
mhm.
doing something else throughout the week too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent advice. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've a
Pleasure.
bunch
Thank
of
you.
stuff that we can take away from this,
Yes.
and we will definitely have a part two.
Cool.
So everybody stay tuned,
Yeah.
and we will see you all next time.